Gentlemen, I'm back. We're here to talk about the book of Elchasai, and I've got Odon, JC, and Paul with me today. Odon, I'm actually glad he's here. Then I can do a little bit of a revision and get his input on some of what we discussed last week. And so we're going to continue with these really odd, shall we say, Gnostic connections, Gnostic parallels, Gnostic antecedents to Islam, and certain historical parallels that very rare historical parallels that are adopted into the Islamic narrative. So yeah, guys, welcome. Thank you, Paul, for coming back. JC, Odon. Yeah, Paul, I'll start with you. Just briefly, last week, I know that you understand the Standard Islamic Narrative very well. You're busy with your book, which hopefully we'll discuss at some point soon as well. Talk about your perspectives on your book. But I know that I'm kind of off on a tangent on where I'm going with this, but to me, at the moment, I'm doing 3 series. One is about pagan influences in Islam, because there are copious names that, if you read the tafsirs, they'll say, oh no, that's a guy that did this, that's a guy that did that. When you look at the history, you find that these are well-known pagan deities that were entrenched in that region for thousands of years, and they're included in the Quran, and they are discussed. And you find all of these parallels, all of these links, all of these loose ends in the tafsirs, the hadiths, the sirahs, and so on. So I'm busy working on the old pagan connections in Islam, all of these little odd things that are just all over the place, unresolved. I'm doing a series on that. I'm doing a series now on the Jewish connections and practices as well, and also now on these Gnostic connections. What was your take on last week? I mean, you seem to be very surprised that there seems to be an overwhelming amount of these Gnostic links in Islam, or these parallels with prior religions that were clearly Gnostic. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. There's obviously a huge amount of cultural influences upon the Quran. It's very widely a wide range of influences and references, and it takes a lot of decoding. I mean, a lot of this stuff would have been familiar to the audience, to the average Arab in the 7th century, but a lot of it would be quite arcane, it seems to me. Not every person would know everything, and would have needed a lot of explanation, I think, to people. I wonder one question that arises out of this is how widespread do you think the references would have been picked up? Do you think, Lloyd, that most people would have got most of it? Or do you think it was a very elitist document that was just going for those people who knew a bit of this and a bit of that? What do you think?
That's a very good question. And my guess would be, based on some previous findings, probably leaning towards the elitist element. I think there would be a general understanding within people that fix would...
Lloyd.
We are losing you, Lloyd.
Yes, JC?
Yeah, we lost you. We didn't hear the last 30 seconds.
Differences that the general public could probably relate to as a general vibe, but that if it's elitist, if that is the case, then it gives us, or if it's aimed at the general populace, then that gives us something of the intent. Then you can start to infer or extract something from that.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I found most interesting last discussion that we had is the Gospel of Peter, wasn't it? The apocryphal Gospel, where it had the people
walking,
coming out
talking cross.
Sorry?
The walking, talking cross.
Yeah, I think my translation by Bart Ehrman doesn't actually have a talking cross. He has something slightly different. It has a voice coming out of the sky, but other than that, it's the same. I don't know if it's we could actually dig down into that. Not tonight, but the idea, the people coming out of the cave, the angel coming out of the cave and then growing so that their head goes into the sky, which seems so similar to the story of the angel Gabriel hugging Muhammad, And then when Muhammad was thinking about throwing himself off the cliff, the angel then rises up, which is why you then have the man on the horizon by the low tree. So I found that very interesting. I think you've persuaded me that there is a connection there.
Great to hear it. Yeah. Thanks, JC. Your thoughts?
My thoughts are, with all of these different data points, I wonder what would happen if we got a map and then we put all of the different data points on that map. Like in this area, these people, for example, chop hands of thieves. In this region, they perform circumcision, and so on and so forth. And all of these different ideas, if we put them all on a map, if we would get some places that it would actually say, okay, the traditions originated from this region, or if we would get something like, no, the origins are from everywhere, and as they moved conquering more lands, they simply appropriated those things. I wonder if it would yield anything if we could put those things on a map, and it would get us closer to the answer. Food for thought.
Right. Good point. Yeah, Odin, I'll do a little bit of review for your benefit, but do you have any thoughts before we continue?
Yeah, I have one actually. A thing that's been bothering me about all these influences within Islam is at what time did they come into Islam? Because I think some of these influences were added when at a time when traditionists were writing the stories and so on. So during the Abbasid era, and they were imposed on the people from by the leaders of the new Islam. So all of these traditions might not have been shared by the early Muslims, but they might have been imposed afterwards.
That's actually that would be a good distinction to draw. Then it would give you an idea of its development. And one would then ask, why would they want to go back to all of these old pagan and Gnostic traditions and insert them into the narrative?
That's the question. Maybe because some of the leaders or the traditionists were already influenced by them, but it might also have been convenient at the time to rely on ready-made stories that were a bit known and that were known to be efficient
and could be repurposed.
Like copying all the midrash, all the Jewish stories, and applying them to Muhammad. Like Muhammad fleeing Mecca and taking refuge in a cave where a spider spun its web at the entrance, protecting Muhammad from the Meccans. It's the same story as with David, the king, future King David, fleeing the armies of Saul.
Right. No, makes sense. So tell you what, JC, you asked briefly, but the Book of Elchasai comes from Parthia. We would call it Iran today. So that's part of Persia. So the prophet hails from here. But then again, so do the writers of the Hadiths, also hail from the same area. Oddly, they don't come from down here, from where they should, which is Mecca and Medina. So obviously these stories are well known within their sphere, which is interesting. And of course, the Sasanian Empire had conquered all the way across here. And then, of course, they were conquered by the Muslims eventually. But notice they also had influence down here in Sana'a in Yemen. So these stories were clearly spread, right? Now, the Hadith writers largely stem from the East, Iraq, and so on. And now notice, just for your benefit, I'll just breeze through this quickly as a review for you, but to get your thoughts. Gabriel in the form of a man with his feet astride the horizon. Gabriel, okay, who was so large, he covered the entire sky. Now, there's multiple hadiths and so on. It's part of the seerah that Gabriel was massive. Now, Gabriel was in the cave, but Gabriel comes out, and Gabriel is massive. He's like 100 kilometers or more tall, 150 kilometers tall, effectively, right? But if you look at the stories in the Book of Elchasai, and so on, you've got a massive angel who's also like 150 kilometers tall, right? So that these are almost there's only two sources in history that have this particular theme, and Islam borrows this theme, right? So it's very unusual. Aisha says he only saw Gabriel in his genuine shape covering the whole horizon, right? He was so huge, he covered the whole horizon. That's Gabriel's real shape, but he could fit in a cave as well. Now, of course, we should note that within the Gnostic stories, you've got the angels, obviously, and in the Bible, you've got the angels supposedly in the cave or just outside the cave, normal-sized people, right? But the book of Elchasai is a book sent down by heaven by a massive angel, right? He's from Parthia, northern Iran. And Hadith writers borrowed many local myths. You've got Elchasai, Elchasaios, Elchasai, Ilchasai, and so on and so on. It's multiple different pronunciations. In fact, there are others as well beyond what you see here, right? So these are well-known stories. Many of them were refuted by the early Christian writers. Early Christian church fathers wrote about these and refuted these as heresies. Hippolytus, Eusebius, Epiphanius, Origen all wrote about these things, only in the context of heresy, right? So, and Ilchasai means hidden power, right? It comes from the Aramaic. They claim the book came down from heaven. They rejected the Apostle Paul. And also they stated that outward denial of your faith is permitted, provided that you only deny with your lips and not in your heart. And of course, that is exactly the same as what is in the Quran in terms of taqiyya. So we've got this overlap here, right, with that. Now, the original idea comes from the Shurkoma, a Jewish, we can call it a heterodox Jewish practice, where these Jews were making up stories and they were talking about angels that were 96 miles tall, 14 miles wide, feet 4 miles wide, and so on, right? And Hippolytus speaks of this. Now, this was, and there was two giant angels, the Son of God and the female, the Holy Spirit, right? So this is part of a Midrashic text, the Shur Kama, the precise measurement of God's corporeal limbs, right? And they speak of the angel Metatron. So these are all touch points that will come up within Islam and within Elchasai or the Elchasites, right? So his head reached beyond the heavens. So these are all well-known references within that. Then you've got the Gospel of Peter by a French archaeologist discovered in 1886, right? And what you've got is, you've got two young men supporting the one, right? And the head of the two angels. So they come out of the cave as normal size, but then they grow and their heads touched into the heavens. They become giant, massive angels, right? And so this is well known as well. So these are well sourced. The conclusion is that the Elchasites had a Jewish Christian background. So this overlaps with you, Odon, right? These are from two Brill publications, right? That I got all this information, right? And they speak of Song of Songs as something that's very relevant. Muslims also talk of that as a sign of Muhammad. But anyone who studies it is guaranteed a portion in the world to come, right? And if you believe the book and you believe its contents and you convert, then you will, by baptism, receive remission of sins, right? They were encouraged to follow the law, including circumcision. They condemned sacrifices, rejected eating means, and they had very pagan astrology, right? And also they have a cryptogram, Aramaic formula, which presupposes the readers all understood Aramaic, right? So it might be that the book was written in Aramaic, right? And it was disseminated amongst many other groups. It was very widely disseminated. Jewish Christian, the Jewish Nazarenes, Judeo-Christian Ebionites, and Epiphanius gives us evidence for this as well. And they heavily influenced Mani, who lived amongst them until he was 24. His father was an Elchasite as well, right? I'll pause there. Do you have any thoughts, anything you want to add before we go on?
I have just one thought. You see, I've done a bit of research on these Judeo-Christians groups before Islam. It's one of the bases of my book, The Great Secret of Islam. And what I've come to believe is that there were no these different groups. They appear to be very different. As they are described by ancient historians. But we have to take into account that these ancient historians wanted them to be very different in order to identify different heresies.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there was a lot of overlap between all these groups. They shared scriptures, they shared ideas. They were not so different.
Certainly, they all came from a similar source, similar streams.
Yeah.
So yes, agreed.
So it might be a bit artificial to draw borders between Ebionites or Nazarenes,
we'll talk more about that,
and so on.
No, we'll talk more about that as we get, because often in one source you'll find that someone will say, "Hey, these are Ebionites," but you go to another source later, and they will be called a different name completely, of a different group that one would think were two distinct groups, but it turns out they are the same, or they're just slight variations on the same theme.
Now, for example, Ebionite, the expression Ebionite, it might at the beginning have referred to a very specific group, but in the end it became a generic expression.
Right.
It's a bit like communist, for example. When you say communists, what do you refer to?
Yeah, it's a pretty widespread.
Leninist, Stalinist. A communist in Northern Korea is not the same as in Cuba, and so on.
Not the same as China, not the same as in the UK today.
Yeah, for example.
On Sunday, actually, I'm doing a talk on the Fabian Society, drawn from their own written records, which are publicly available on their website. And every single Labour Prime Minister in UK history has been a member of the Fabian Society. And the fact it's incredible how this communist group, the socialist group, which their founders praised Hitler, praised Stalin, praised Lenin, they spoke of people should every 5 to 7 years come before a tribunal and justify their existence. And if they cannot justify their existence and explain how they are a benefit to society and not a net draw upon its reserves, then they should be sent to a chamber. I won't specify what kind of chamber, but you're not going to come out of it again once you go in. Literally, this was what their founders openly discussed, publicly discussed, and it is insanity. And these people are, the amount of policies they've introduced into the UK, how they've changed the UK's policy, governance, direction, social structures, government structures. It is insanity to read through. It is crazy. I'll be doing that on Sunday. Yeah, and then they speak of Metatron, and of course, Elchasai is said to have transmitted his book to the Sobiai, the Sabians.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we spoke already about how the Sabians, Muhammad was a Sabi, Muhammad was a Sabian, and all of that. So you get all of these overlaps. You get all of these crazy overlaps, right? And then, of course, side note, the 7 readings of the Quran, these are the 7 original. There are now 14. There were 7, then 10, then 14 Qira'at. But oddly enough, one of the major Qira'at of the Quran is Elchasai. I ended with that. So any thoughts before I continue? Because this is where we ended last time.
That was a fun way to end it. I'll have just a quick question after what you guys said before. Am I right in thinking that the Abbasid revolt started somewhere in near Merv, in that part of the world? Do you guys know?
I don't know.
Traditionally, it all starts with the Battle of Karbala, doesn't it? Is that? Oh no, sorry, that's the second bit. Ignore I said that.
Yeah. I can't remember where it was, but this group with the black banners that I think they came from that region, just trying to actually join the dots. Because if Islam, basically the book begins in the 7th century, and that is the Rashidun and then Umayyads, they would have a particular set of beliefs. But by the time that the Abbasids take over, just like Lloyd has shown, the hadiths, all of the stories they're going to create a new theology. And lots of the stories that they're going to create, they're not going to be from the Jews and Christians. The Umayyads would have been closer to the Jews and Christians, but by the time that we get to the Abbasids, they're bringing a whole different culture. They're trying to maintain what works, but it would make sense that in their theology, they start creating all of these different stories. So just thinking that maybe those things connect in that manner, like Odon said, before we had one tradition, and then things are added later, and the Abbasids come from a different region, and that's what we see in their traditions. maybe.
I think the Byzantine Empire and it seems to have been driven out of Syria, Palestine, and the Sasanian Empire seems to have collapsed. So one tends to think of it as a new empire. The empire of the Arabs has taken over. But I don't think it was quite that simple. These two great empires had their proxies. They had the Ghassanids on the Byzantine side, and they had the Lakhmids on the Sasanian side. And these Ghassanids and Lakhmids, they'd been fighting each other off and on for centuries. They would have had a complex system of alliances, and they'd have had personal enmities between people. They wouldn't necessarily have just joined together into one happy band. My suspicion is that the same division that you had between the Ghassanids and the Lakhmids just mapped over onto what became the Umayyads and the Abbasids, because you have this concern from the Umayyads. Everything has to be about Jerusalem. That's why they built the Dome of the Rock and so on. And the concern of the Abbasids, which is to move everything eastwards to Baghdad. And I suspect that what you see with the Umayyads and the Abbasids is really almost a continuation of the old war between Rome and Persia. Just fought with new people.
Yeah.
So
there's also a thing with the Umayyads. I had read somewhere that the Umayyads benefited from an immigration from Mervian or Arabs from Merv. Mm-hmm. The father of Abdul Malik, Marwan, was from Merv, and so the influence of Merv, as we were discussing it, is also within the Umayyad system.
Mm.
Okay, so yeah, I'll continue here unless you guys have anything else. So it is said that Elchasai took this name from a particular kind of mantle he wore. I don't know if this is true, but let's just say called a kisa. Okay. Now it should be noted, Muhammad also had a favorite piece of clothing, a particular mantle, right? A cape, a short cape. Yeah. And Muhammad liked the mantle of Yemen. That was his favorite piece of clothing. And Elchasai apparently took this name from a particular kind of, and if you have a look at the Encyclopedia of Islam, the people of the Kisa, the people of the cloak, the Prophet and his daughter, Fatima. Mm-hmm. His son-in-law, Ali, and his grandsons, Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein, whom the Prophet sheltered under his cloak. Now you've got another parallel. Right?
Yeah, almost the same people as the Al-Bayt.
Yes, exactly. It's just an odd parallel, just a really odd parallel, yeah. Right? Oh, by the way, question. Ahmed has 3 lunchboxes. He gives one to Muhammad and another to Hassan. What is the radius of the explosion?
That's good.
Yeah, just advanced Islamic knowledge. Just things you have to know about Islam. Things ask a Muslim. Maybe they can help you there. Okay, so moving on. Now the Laudate.
I strongly suspect that all this story about Muhammad having this cape, because when he has his first encounter with Gabriel, the angel Jabril, is also said to be wearing a cape with some writing on. That whoever wrote the story down didn't know what the writing said or didn't mention it. But I think this is all a rather literal and banal reading of surahs 73 and 74, which talk about the enwrapped one and the enrobed one, yeah. In which the prophet is told, go clean, go purify your garment. The tradition says, oh, that's because Gabriel was telling Muhammad to go and wash his cape or something. It doesn't mean anything like that at all. It's about the raiment of righteousness that Adam and Eve wore in the Garden of Eden, and Satan stripped them of, and then God talks about giving you your restoring your righteousness as a garment. So that's really what it's about. But I put all this emphasis in the narrative. Oh, Muhammad had this favorite coat.
But sometimes they
just be a part of this rather banal explanation that was come out by somebody at some time.
It could mean that as well.
A meaning.
I mean, for instance, Muslims, just like in Judaism, you've got these multiple levels of meaning. I can't remember what they are now. I've got a list somewhere, but they're not secret about it. But in Islam, you've also got multiple layers of meaning, right? So you've got the external, the internal, and so on. You've got the Zahir, the batin, and you've got then different levels with the internal meanings. So you have these. So you could have the external meaning, which is one thing, and then there's another meaning, another level of meaning, which is an allusion to something else. And then you can have another layer of meaning, which a higher scholar would have a different level of understanding. So that's also part of the practice of Islam that's not very well known within the Sharia.
No, I agree with that, but I'm very skeptical that the Quran ever told Muhammad to go and wash his coat. If he thought his coat needed washing, he'd have gone and washed it. He wouldn't have written a verse in the Quran about it.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, they speak here of so the al-Kisa and their descendants, right? So this is also in reference to, and a general word for garment in North Africa, a piece of flannel worn by learned men around the body and the head, right? Now it's odd that perhaps if you speak of the garment of righteousness, maybe they took that and they made it into a literal reference. Maybe these people are that uneducated. Maybe they're that basic in their thinking. No, it could well be. Okay, so Elchasai is a historical figure. The Kitab al-Fihrist references a manuscript by Muslim scholar Ibn al-Nadim, in which he identifies Elchasai instituting the Babylonian Baptist sect of the Mu'tazila or the Mu'tazilites, and they are practitioners of ablution, right? Not baptism, ablution. Muslims do that 5 times a day in theory, also known as the Qatarioi. We would know that as effectively the Cathars, or that word would then allude to the Cathars. And the Mu'tazilites, of course, those are well known. They are referenced within Islamic literature. So the sect is based upon the revelations he had in his 20s. So one of the followers of the Elchasai was Mani. He joined the Elchasites when he was only 4 years old by his father, who was a convert to the Mu'tazila sect. So Mani went on to form his own Gnostic sect known as the Manichaeans. But it's just odd that you've got the Mu'tazilites that had their own conflict and their own deep engagement with the Muslims on theological grounds, and Islam mentions them as the Mu'tazilites. So now you've got this another touch point in history as well. And Heiko Luaman, the Finnish scholar, highlights the later adoption of the book by the Ebionites as evidence that the book contained teachings favorable to the Ebionites, and further argues that the adoption of the book makes a distinct separation from Judaism. Now, if these people influenced Islam, and these heretical sects maybe had some influence on Islam, then this could also account for some of their distinct separation from Judaism. That's my thinking. Just your thoughts on this, guys. Odon, you're nodding your head there.
No, I found all of this very, very interesting. It's all the more interesting that we have here in Islam, we have influences from before Islam, like, for example, Jewish influences, Judeo-Christian influences. But we also have influences that came afterwards when the story of Muhammad was invented. And some of it was copied on Mani's story. Mani is supposed to have been given a revelation by the angel Gabriel, for example. It's a very, very odd coincidence.
He was the seal of the prophets.
Muhammad's story. And
yes.
It's very funny. You see, it's a sort of answer to the question I was asking just a while ago. there were influences that came afterwards, but these influences that were added in the stories during the Abbasid era, but they were already there in a way. There were already people who were convinced that Mani was a prophet. And when they wrote the story of Muhammad, they wrote it with Mani in mind.
That's, this seems to be, he seems to be one of the influences that seems to color the story.
One of the influences, of course.
Yeah. I mean, look, for instance, like, we've spoken about Dan Gibson, and I mean, I don't think he's wrong, but I also don't think his answer is, shall we say, complete. So I think there needs to be more detail added. There are other influences that are neglected there. So I think there's, I mean, it's as you made the distinction earlier, when were these influences added? Why were they added? And then, Paul, your question about, like, who was it they're trying to appeal to? And do we have shifts as to who they're trying to appeal to? These are all things that are part of this equation, which is a really complex equation. But I don't think there's one clear, specific answer. But there seem to be genuine touch points and overlaps with so many pre-existing ideas.
I hadn't heard of these Mutazilites. You had, I know the Mutazilites in early Islam. I hadn't been aware of the term being used before then. Who are they?
So we'll get into that. We'll get into that in a moment. I'm not going to touch too heavily on them. I'll mention them. So I'll get to them in a minute. Yep, go on.
Just before we go on, that when we see that in the Quran we have like pseudo gospels in there and legends, I think, could be wrong about this. The only reasons that we actually have these pseudo gospels is because the Christians actually kept them. If Muslims had the opportunity to destroy those sources, they would have done so, and now it would be a great mystery. These sources that you are showing, we don't have the book of Elchasai. It would have been in Islamic lands. The Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, I think, as well, is gone. So I reckon it's very plausible that a lot of the stuff that we have, like in the Quran, is of Arabic script existing and the Bible not being written, when every time that a script appeared, the Gospels were written down almost immediately. So I think it's more plausible that there were things written in Arabic, but
that is
very by Islam.
Unlikely, because the Karaites were writing Hebrew works in Arabic script from the early 7th century already, if not a little sooner.
Yeah.
So the Karaites, that's another fishy story right there that needs to be looked at deeper. But yeah, they had access to that. And then you had the Ethiopian Bible, was around since the 3rd century in that region.
So there must have been, I think it's something that we would all agree on, is when they find something they don't like, it gets immediately abrogated. So there.
Yeah. I mean, look, at the moment, Muslims, like, for instance, Paul Williams, who blocked me on Twitter finally, because I kept challenging him and I kept inviting him to, hey, let's talk about whatever. And I kept, trying to have these discussions with him. But anyway, he has been working very hard to try to claim that the infancy gospel of Thomas is a legitimate ancient document that verifies the Quran. Because when they found the earliest known copy from the 5th century of the infancy gospel, he was pretty much spinning cartwheels.
No. I don't understand how it could validate the Quran.
Because many of the Quran stories, like the clay birds, Jesus bringing these clay birds to life, that's in the infancy gospel. So he wants that to be a true ancient document, a genuine Christian book that validates the Quranic story.
No, it definitely was not Christian. Everyone knows this. It's an apocryphal.
You mean that there weren't many Christianities?
Of course there were, but
no, there's only one. I mean, come on,
it's not a canonical scripture.
Yeah, I mean, no, these were heresies. I mean, it's like it's what Erman. I mean, there were many Christianities. It's like,
it's a very odd thing for a Muslim to say that Christian heresies validate Islam. This is actually what he was saying.
Yes,
Islam is based on Christian heresies. But
he's been trying really hard.
We here, you, Lloyd, Paul, JC, and me, we don't say otherwise. We actually think Islam is based on Christian and Jewish heresies.
Pretty much. I mean, I tried to engage with him on social media. Eventually, he blocked me, as I said. And you know, I mean, he's slippery, but he knows. He must know. The guy's not that. He's not stupid, clearly. So, but he's got to know he's making up shaggy dog stories. So anyway, okay, the Ebionites and the adoptionists. Okay, also known as the Essenes. Now, these are not the Essenes from the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? In 2nd century, they thought that Jesus was just a man, a great moral teacher born of Mary and Joseph and adopted by God, right? So God says, hey, I like you. I'm going to make you into something special. So they ignored the entire soteriological doctrine, salvation doctrine of the New Testament, which is salvation through Jesus Christ, delivered from the Greek soter or savior, and had no teaching about the Holy Spirit. Now, Islam technically has no teaching about the Holy Spirit either. They speak of the Ruh al-Quds, but depending on which Muslim you ask, the Ruh al-Quds is Muhammad himself. The Ruh al-Quds is the angel Gabriel when he's doing something for Allah, but they don't really have a doctrine of the Holy Spirit.
Actually, just on this, there is a verse in the Quran that says, when they ask you about the Spirit, say, my Lord has not given us knowledge except a little, or something like this, which is basically what you have said there, like them saying, we know there is something called the Spirit, but we don't know about it, even though the Quran is full of references to the Holy Spirit.
Correct, which is really odd, which is another little parallel here. So they were Jews, but believed in Jesus. Okay, interesting. Muslims believe in Jesus too. They held on to, you know what's crazy? I've been watching, off topic, Tucker Carlson talking about, do you know that Muslims love and cherish and revere Jesus as well? That Jesus is one of the greatest prophets. I was reading Tucker write this, and after everything else this man has been saying, like capitalism has no place within the Christian doctrine. I mean, at its core, as this guest on his show was saying, Christianity is socialist. And Tucker's like, yes. And you're like, this man has gone insane. You know, but anyway, obviously
he's learning. He's learning.
Jesus, because of Western culture and advancements really into traditions, Jesus is often mocked in various ways. Recently, for example, think of the Paris Olympics. They had that tableau of the Last Supper, making a mockery out of Jesus. I understand there's a film coming out shortly about Mary, in which some of the pictures have her wearing sort of very salacious dress, a revealing dress, which obviously doesn't look as though she's guarding her modesty terribly well, and so on and so forth. Muslims never seem to get angry about that. They often they'll say, "Oh, Jesus is Mary highly respected in Islam." They probably mean it truthfully when they say it. But if somebody produces a Christmas card or a crib scene that makes fun of the Holy Family, no Muslim ever gets particularly irate or troubled about it. Whereas somebody does a cartoon of Muhammad and suddenly riots across the world. There's no doubt who they really have their allegiance to, but it's not Jesus. He just seems to be assimilated along the way. Oh yeah, he's ours too.
Yeah, it's lip service.
They don't seem to feel it as much.
Agreed. Yeah. Any other thoughts before I continue, guys?
Let's continue.
Great. Yeah.
Just one thought. Thank you, Lloyd. You wrote they were Jews, but they believed in Jesus. But the thing is, what Jesus did they believe in? It's the same with with the thing with Tucker Carlson. You see, all post-Christian group all these groups, they all have one thing in common. They have the right Jesus. They know about the right Jesus. And the one thing that they all have in common is that this right Jesus is not the Christian Jesus. It's someone else that is much more convenient for them.
Agreed. Yeah, true. I mean, it doesn't specify what Jesus, but clearly not the Orthodox Jesus, the heterodox one. So they held on to observance of the old law. It is said that the Apostle John wrote his gospel at the request of the ministers of several churches of Asia, in opposition to the heresy of Corinth and the Ebionites, who held that Jesus was a mere man. So that's the Jesus. So I think this is in Epiphanius or one of these guys. Eusebius writes this here. And Gnostics, with edited versions of the Gospel of Matthew, even using the word Theotokos, that's the mother of God, Mary, believe that God commanded the angel Michael to create Mary, who was pregnant when he was created. But this is very similar to Allah sending Jibril down to blow into the vajayjay of Mary. Mm-hmm. So again, you've got another similar background prior to Islam, where stories similar to that could be repurposed.
So Mary was created pregnant?
Yeah.
I don't understand that.
Yeah, she was pregnant as a baby, and as a child she was also pregnant. So she had a 15 years long pregnancy, something like this.
Okay.
I have no idea. It just that none of this makes sense. But I mean, these are some of these groups. The thing is that even within a group that has a defined name, like let's say you take, I don't know, the Ebionites, just a random, it doesn't necessarily mean them, but you'd have Johnny of the Ebionites in one place has these beliefs, and then Johnny of the Ebionites in another place. If you look at the Cathars, you go into the Cathars in the Middle Ages, early Middle Ages, they had wildly conflicting beliefs sometimes from the same group.
Yeah.
So they're all Cathars, but they wouldn't agree with each other whatsoever. So because they were making stuff up as they went. They weren't based on history. They weren't based on anything objective. It's all based on Gnostic sensation, feeling, right? Subjective knowledge. So they would randomly make stuff up anyway and still call themselves, I'm a Gnostic, I'm a Cathar.
Oh yeah, it's even in the Quran. In the Quran, there is this passage about the Qibla, and I think it's Surah 2, verse 146, something like this. And it is said there that the people of the scriptures have different Qiblas, and they don't agree with each other. And Qibla is here to be understood as tradition. So it's already in the Quran that there were different Jewish Christian groups that did not agree with each other.
I like what you say there. Also, I mean, the thing is, I started taking apart all of these odd references. I mean, look, when I was working in security, right, you move into a disputed environment or potentially risky environment, right? You're looking for things that stand out because you set the baseline and then you look for things that are above or below the baseline, things that just don't belong, things that just stand out, and things that are too quiet, too still, too loud, too fast, whatever, because you're trying to feed your subconscious with data so that you can identify threats and respond before they manifest, right? And I was looking at the Quran and the other Islamic sources, and there's these little references that get ignored, but within a security context, there's one author that works in this, very famous, calls them satellites. They're little ideas that you see and they just disappear off at a tangent. But you're like, why is that even there? So you're trained to look for those things. You're trained to see them. So the Islamic narrative is built on the bigger pieces that they can justify. But you got all these random loose ends. And I started to look at these random loose ends. I'm like, why is that there? Why is that there? Where the heck does that come from? And then you start pulling on those threads and you start to come up with all of these things that I'm now putting together. You know, I mean, with the series Monotheism, I go into much more depth than even this. This is a fairly light treatment of the topic. But there's a huge amount of odd names, words, references that once you go into Islam, you go into the pagan history prior, and there's a heck of a lot of stuff that is the source of that. And also, this is where the Arabs get the idea a woman can be pregnant for years. That's exactly what I was thinking as well, Or. So yeah, that could well explain why Muhammad's wife, his mother, was pregnant for 4 years. because the Sharia allows a woman to be pregnant for 4 years, at least in Hanafi fiqh. So yes,
I think for Muhammad it's due to contradiction within the narrative. They had stories about a mother dying at an early age and so on, and so the only way to connect the dots was to invent a 4-year-long or 2 years long pregnancy.
Right. Yeah, so the Quran calls Christians Nazarenes, right? The Gnostic heretical sect, which seems to be Jewish Christian sect.
It's not the Quran. It's a narrative.
The narrative, okay, fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
As for St. John,
the Quran calls
Nazarenes.
Okay.
The Quran calls the Christians Nasara, doesn't it?
Yeah, Nasara.
There may well be a connection between those and the Nazarenes. I personally prefer the idea that it's connected to the Nazarites and the Nazarite oath because of the head-shaping verses.
Yeah, but I think the Manichaeans also call themselves the Nazarenes. The Nazarenes, they also called themselves. So there was a lot of dispute and ownership over the word.
You see, there is a confusion we make here in the West between Nazarenes as Natsaraya with a tzadi and a Nazarites, which is with a zain. It's not the same letter.
Okay.
In the Bible, there is a description of the Nazir rite.
Okay.
When you take a special vow, a special religious vow for a period of time when you consecrate yourself to God, you have a very, very strict appliance, not appliance. You abide very strictly to the law. For example, you do not touch or approach a corpse. You do not take any fruit of the vine, so juice or wine or vinegar.
Okay.
And at the end of your vow, you shave your head and you give your hair as a sacrifice at the temple. Paul, for example, does this. It's I don't remember whether it's in the Acts or one of his epistles.
It's in the Acts.
This Nazir thing, it's not the same as Nazarene.
Okay.
Nazarene is with another root, Netzer. Netzer, it refers to the prophecy of Isaiah, where it says that a stem will come from the root of Jesse, and the stem being the Messiah.
Okay, that's really helpful. So, okay, these distinctions are important.
And the thing is, in Greek, there is no tzadi. And so the transcription in Greek of Natsaraya has been Nazarene with a Z. And this has led to some confusion between the two. And it's all the more confusing that you can have Nazarenes abiding to the Nazir rule and being themselves Nazarites.
Wow. Yeah, so we need, okay, great. Yeah, so St. John, it said here that to refute the heresies at Corinth and of the Ebionites, I think this is in, I can't remember the name of this text, but this is a very old historical text on the Bible. It's like a Bible dictionary or Bible encyclopedia. Okay, he shows us, so he writes his works to refute certain heresies. That's part of where he's going. Okay, so the vegetarians that hated Paul. To Ebionites, Jesus was the Messiah. But remember, he's not the real Jesus Messiah as we know him. And this separated them from the other Jews in antiquity. He was the perfect sacrifice. He abolished sacrifices. Most people in that era only ate meat when it had been sacrificed and blessed, hence they were vegetarians due to the sacrifices abolition. Unlike Christians, they insisted on remaining Jewish. They required Ebionite converts to first become Jews. They deny Jesus' divinity, his pre-existence, his virgin birth. They lacked the Gospels of Luke, Matthew, John. They had an altered Matthew text. The Gospel of the Nazarenes, a Greek harmony of Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
We are not sure about this Gospel of the Nazarene being a Greek harmony of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It might have been the Gospel of Matthew, but that could have been a bit altered. The Gospel of Matthew was the first one. It was originally intended for Jews who spoke Aramaic.
Right. So, go on. Sorry.
And so it was widely spread among the Jewish people. It was a reference.
When I was doing some work on Christianity, it's a show I did. I did the research years ago. I've never actually done a show on it. When I did research on the presence of Christianity in Arabia, because there's some interesting, fascinating papers written decades ago on this topic, it seems that there were multiple competing copies of the Gospel of Matthew. It was the most common. So not everyone had a Bible, but they might have a copy of the book of Matthew. But then many Gnostics rewrote it. So it caused extensive confusion because is this the original Christian version, or is this Gnostic group, that Gnostic group, this group, that group? So there were like 5 or 6 or 7 different versions, and people had no idea what was right. And most of it had to do with the Gospel of Matthew.
Yeah.
So Paul teaches pagans do not need to become Jews or follow Jewish law to accept salvation, which could lead to a fall from grace. The rejection of Paul.
Just again, a very short remark. Paul never taught that pagans do not need to become Jews. What he taught is that we can become Jews without following the Jewish law.
Maybe it's just bad phrasing, because I mean, in the Gospel of in the Acts of the Apostles, in the First Council of Jerusalem, they make that, they come to the decision that you don't have to become, we're not Jews per se, so you don't have to become a Jew. Yeah, pagans.
Actually, every pagan Christian is a Jew, according to Second Temple Judaism. Because in this time, you didn't need to be a Jew by blood, by your mother, to become a Jew. You could convert to Judaism. And what happened with early Christianity is that pagans who converted to Christianity actually converted to Judaism, but they didn't need to follow the law, the Jewish law.
Yeah.
But Paul explains this with this analogy of the how do I call it, there is this ancient stump on which out of which comes Judaism, and there are branches that are implanted in
the vine. The grafting in, you get grafted into the vine.
Yeah, grafted, exactly. That's a thing. And by being grafted, you become from the stump, from the ancient root.
Right.
And so it means that the pagans became sort of Jews, but without following the law. But the law became useless, according to Paul.
Right. Yeah, but you don't have to first convert to Judaism and then you become a follower of Christ. You don't have to go through that process, because there's a change, right? Circumcision of the heart and all of that. Okay,
exactly.
So they reject Paul, right? This is present today in Islam and in the Mandean Gnostic religion. Now which is odd though, because I mean, if you read the Sirah and the Hadiths and stuff, and in the Quran, Paul is regarded with great respect. It's only modern Muslims generally just reject him. But now Hamza writes, this is from Francois de Blas, the Sabians in pre-Islamic Arabia, the Sabiyun. Hamza writes that the pagans used to be called Chaldeans, but in the time of Islamic dominion, they called themselves the Sabiyun. Now he's speaking about the Babylonians. Oddly enough, it becomes the Sabi. But the real Sabiyun are Sabiyun nafi Hakika. So these are the Sabiyuns, right, with the Hakika, the knowledge, that's the elevated secret knowledge, effectively, are a sect of Christians who live in the region between the cultivated lands and the swamp. And they differ from the general mass of Christians and are reckoned by the latter among the heretics. Among Orientalists, there has for some time now been a virtual consensus that the real Sabians, the Sabians of the Quran, are in fact the Mandaeans, the well-known Gnostic sect which survived to the present day on both sides of the Iraq-Iran border in the marshlands where the Tigris and Euphrates flow into the Persian Gulf. Right? And he says here, the Mandaeans are great baptizers. Baptism is the main point of their ritual, right? And a well-known feature of the Mandaic dialect of Aramaic is precisely the loss of the ayn. Thus, Arabic sabi or sabi could well represent the Mandaic form of the participle of the root to baptize, right? And then, of course, Patek joined a sect called, Mani's father, Patek, joined a sect called the Al-Mutazila, which An-Nadim says their remnants survived in the swamps until our day. Mani's is brought up in this community, but later separates to form his own religion, right? And then they speak of the Mutazilites. Now you've got the Sabians, the Mutazilites, and this heretical Christian sect, the Sabians, and so on, all seem to, there's a confluence there. Let's just say there's a confluence, right? And now, so we've already mentioned that Muhammad becomes a Sabi, right? So Muhammad becomes a Sabi, according to these, at least the Hadiths, which, as we know, are written 250 years or so or more after Muhammad dies, right? But at least within that narrative, within that literature, Muhammad becomes a Sabi. The Sabi have exactly the same practices that Muslims practice today, 95% the same practices that Muslims have today. Now, the secret words, the secret formula, Klatu, Barata, Nikto. You guys don't know the reference?
No, sorry, I haven't read Harry Potter.
The Evil Dead, man, come on.
Evil Dead. Oh, no, I saw that one, but it was a very long time ago.
The Evil Dead, Klatu. But anyway, the book ends with a prophecy of imminent eschatological war. Now remember, within the Quran, Muhammad was highly eschatological. He was very much a apocalyptic fiend, okay? Everyone's going to be dead in 100 years. The book of Elchasai was also mad about prophecy of apocalypse, right? There would be an eschatological war, which is what the Quran teaches. Muslims were all over that early on, but now, of course, they've kind of let that slide because it's embarrassing, right? But those who pray a secret Aramaic formula, Klatu, Barata, Nikto, will be saved. And the logogryph was deciphered in 1858, okay, apparently independently by two scholars. When the first 6 words are read from right to left, they reveal a Greek transcription of an Aramaic sentence, Ena mishad elichon biom dinaraba. Right? I bear witness to you on the day of the great judgment. I will testify on your behalf on the day of the great judgment. Which is very similar to the structure of the Shahada and what Muslims believe. I testify, and those who believe in the last day will be saved. If you say the Shahada and you believe in the last day, and of course you believe in Muhammad. But I think there's a bit of a similarity there. The idea, the structure is similar. So the day of the great judgment is an eschatological term in early Enoch literature, which we missed. You missed that section, Odo, when I went over all of the Enoch references. I bear witness.
So slightly aside on that. It's probably got no significance whatsoever, really. But when people take the oath in England, the customary in a courtroom, the customary formula is, I swear by Almighty God to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But because of the Act of Settlement, where England and Scotland came together to form the Kingdom of Great Britain, Scots law was preserved. So anyone taking the oath is entitled to take the Scottish form of the oath, the Scots form, which is, I swear by Almighty God, and I shall answer to as I shall answer on the great day of judgment. So after that phrase survives to the present day. So
that is interesting.
From my time in the courts, the only time I ever saw anyone do that was occasionally the Scottish police officer who knew that you could do this and wanted to make a bit of a point to keep the old form of words alive. But this phrase as I shall answer to God on the great day of judgment is quite.
But that tells you that certain ideas survive, certain traditions can survive for centuries. You know, they can influence people for down the centuries. Now, Muslims will say, I bear witness that there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his slave and messenger, or similar, right? Muslims must also believe in the last day, the day of great judgment. Now, although the Geniza manuscript is judged to be 11th century, it derives from the genre of Merkava literature. So that's Merkava mysticism, like sort of Jewish occultic magic / literature, right? And it says here, mention my name and call me in a low voice, and no creature will do him harm nor reach him, right? It is associated with salvational reckoning in weeks. Thus, we now have from Qumran, the Aramaic version of 1 Enoch 91:15. So, as I said, I wrote this 5 years ago, and I haven't done it on my channel. And to be honest, I haven't read all of it thoroughly. But there starts to be overlap with certain themes, certain ideas, certain phrases you say, certain things you say that bring you to salvation or save your soul, and so on, right? And because the Jews believed that thereafter the 10th week and the 7th part of which an eternal judgment and the fixed time of the great judgment shall be executed in vengeance in the midst of the holy ones. So a lot of these things, a lot of these ideas are taken from Jewish Merkava mysticism or taken from Jewish, from the Kabbalah, right? So the idea of the great angels, for instance, that's taken from the Kabbalah, right? Or Kabbalah, however people want to pronounce it, because the Jews believed in it, and these are heterodox Jews who had these certain beliefs, made their way into Elchasai, made their way into Islam. Ultimately, there always seems to be some kind of Jewish source and then a mixing with other traditions as well.
Right,
yeah, go on, please.
Just before we go on, with the whole bear witness, that is something that I always found so incredibly odd with Islam, because I bear witness that there is only one God and Muhammad is his prophet. Is like, but you cannot bear witness to something that you are not witnessing. It's just all backwards. But also there is this thing, I don't know where I heard it about, you shall not bear false witnesses. False witness. So it's all very bizarre that their declaration of faith is something that by definition is faith alone, that you are not witnessing. It is a lie from the offset. And the moment that they look at anything to do with their traditions or their history, they realize that the whole thing is it collapses. It's just incredibly bizarre, right?
Yeah, but you know what? When they say I bear witness to you. They're telling you there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his slave, right? So it's a fallback position when they're saying, but I believe this and therefore I am okay. I am saved. You see? If you mention my name and call me in a low voice, no creature will do you harm nor reach you. It's an invocation. It's like a magical spell.
Words.
Yeah, it's magic words. So it's just that there's these certain ideas, but so true faith, Iman, is to believe in Allah, His angels, His inspired books, His messengers, and the last day, right? That's what we need in Islam. Islam is to testify there is no God but Allah, that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, to perform the prayer and so on, right? So the idea of testify, tell me about the true faith, Iman, and the Prophet answered is to believe in Allah and the last day, right? So it's just that there's this overlap with ideas, at least the concept. To me, it just rang a bell, but as we go further through, some of these ideas will start to click together again. Mm-hmm. So from Elchazites, we go to Manichaeans, to the Mandaeans, to Islam. Now, this is Tamarian Green. I've covered this on monotheism. Coulson concluded that these followers of Al-Khasi, okay, or the Elchazites, right, were in fact the Mandaeans, a remnant of whom still make their home in the marshes of the lower Euphrates and Tigris. I think I covered already how the Jewish sage, I can't remember his name, stated that the Sabians were, he also spoke of the Sabians and that they were part of the same group, right? The Gnostic sect practices the sacraments of baptism in flowing water and eating of a sacred meal, subscribe to a radical dualistic theology in which life and the master of greatness is in opposition to Malka Dusaka, the king of darkness. Definition of Mandean belief in its earliest form is difficult because through the centuries, various accretions to their literature and practices have blurred the outlines of their teachings, which seems to be a common thing. They absorb and imbibe ideas as they come across different cultures, and they're not consistent. But certain ideals have remained constant. So there are certain things which are consistent as well in Islam, and there are certain ideas and practices which also seems to have blurred some of their teachings. Thank you very much, Art Butler. Really greatly appreciate it. Thank you. So Let me just continue. So let's see what we come up with here. Now, this is the New Testament Code, the Cup of the Lord, Damascus Covenant, and the Blood of Christ by Robert Eisenman. And he speaks of, Epiphanius speaks of the 4th, 5th century of an unknown bathing group in the Transjordan, descended from the Essenes and the Ebionites, interchangeable with the Elchasites that he calls the Samseans. This last is almost certainly what goes by the name of the Sabaeans in the Islamic tradition. Benjamin of Tudela, in his late 12th century account, identifies synagogues that he visited in Mosul of Nahum the Elchasite or Nahum the Daily Bather, or in his Islamic terms, the Al-Mu'tazila or the Al-Hasi, right? And the Fihrist says the leader of the Mu'tazila, not to be, okay? Oh, Maimonides I was thinking of, right? It is possible that this term in Arabic may even be a variation of what goes in Hebrew as the designation, the Karaites. So, and the Karaites were very much involved with the Abbasids from the 7th to the 10th, 11th centuries, where they were taking the Jewish form of the Old Testament, and they were rewriting it, adding the vowels, the pronunciation, basically altering the Hebrew language to modernize it. And this was being done in parallel with the Quran. The Arabic script was also being modernized and reinvented. Pronunciation, the vowelization and such was also happening at exactly the same time in the same place. So the Old Testament by the Karaites from the 6th, 7th to the 10th, 11th centuries, along with the Quran, were being developed as sister projects under the Abbasids in the same place, and the Karaites were involved with this. And the Karaites were often called Muslim Jews. Right, so I've covered that elsewhere. So it's just that you have now a convergence of these, of things which are supposed to be separate, but now they all seem to converge, and they all converge within the Islamic text. And then Muhammad was a Sabi, and it just all starts to get a little blurry. Your thoughts, guys, on this so far?
Well, it's a lot to process.
I know. I don't. Yeah, go on, please.
I knew a bit about the Karaites. I have a friend who is a member of the Karaite Society, who studies Karaite Judaism, and he told me that they used to, they had stored their scriptures with the Dead Sea Scrolls in the same caves, and that when the Muslim came, one of the Karaites was tasked with getting some of their scriptures from the caves and modifying them in order to acknowledge the Islam and the Muslims. Something that goes along. Yeah.
You're going to say that again, please. Sorry.
Yeah, he told me that there is this story within the Karaites that when Islam established itself, one of the Karaites was tasked with the modification of their ancient scriptures that were stashed and stored in the Dead Sea caves.
Mm-hmm.
And the modification was to an acknowledgement of Muslims as the sort of fulfillment of a prophecy or something. And this came to me as an example of them being Muslim Jews.
Wow. Okay, that's
so. What did he say happened then when this guy was supposedly went into, let's say, falsify the ancient scriptures? I mean, did he succeed? Was the amendment there?
But I don't know whether his scriptures were found. It's a story within the Karaite movement. I should ask my friend about it. He used to be the secretary of this Orientalist organization. It's based in Brussels.
Yeah, actually,
it's the Karaite Society.
I'll mention the Karaites, according to the Jewish Encyclopedia, they were followers of the Bible. So they were Bible alone, sola scriptura Jews, right? They professed to follow the Bible to the exclusion of rabbinical traditions and laws,
exactly.
Which would make them like the Sadducees, right? And it borrowed from earlier sects like the Sadducees, the Essenes, as well as from the Mohammedans.
Yeah.
because they were basically converting all of the Jewish scriptures into Arabic, right? They worked very, very closely, right? Now, Karaites, from Hebrew, kara, to read, interesting, right? They promoted the written Torah alone as the only source of law, rejected the oral law, which they called man-made law, and so on, okay? And these guys, they changed so that Septuagint, when you get from the Septuagint to the Masoretic, there are a number of known changes within the Masoretic script that deviates from the earlier Septuagint. And for instance, they remove a number of the prophecies in support of Jesus, right? So you've got loads of these. And hold on, I've got some notes on, let me see if I can find more notes on the Karaites, because here we go. Let me just bring this up here. So in the Karaite Jews in the Islamic world use both Arabic and Hebrew script. They wrote not only Arabic text in Arabic, but also the Hebrew Bibles in Arabic transcription, right? The Masoretes, right? So, okay, let me skip all of that. Let me see if I want to use that. The Mu'tazilite influence on Karaite interpretation of the Bible. In rejecting oral law, the Karaites emancipated themselves from the Rabbinite tradition. They set about interpreting the Bible using new methods influenced by Islam. This was their most notable undertaking. They applied Islamic exegesis to their new translation of the Masoretic text. So, and these guys are influenced by the Mu'tazilites. Interesting, and we just spoke about the Mu'tazilites.
It goes both ways. You wrote that they interpreted the Bible according to the Islamic ways, but one could also make the point that they taught the Muslim to interpret their own scripture based on the Karaite way.
Correct. Agreed. No, I think I mentioned that here. I just brought this up on a whim. Mu'tazilism constituted one of the elements of Islam that had a determining influence on Karaism during its formative phase. So Al-Masudi says the Karaites were a minority among the Jews, right? But they were people of divine justice and unity, blah, blah, blah. And they were the Mu'tazilites of the Jewish community, right? So it goes on, but these guys basically Islamic. So according to the scholars, the contribution of Islam lay in encouraging, creating the right atmosphere for these new guys to borrow their, as they were now redoing the Islamic script, these guys were borrowing their trends, and then they started to manifest this. The major drive behind Karaism is external to Judaism because it borrowed from Islamic scripturalist models. So these guys were translating the Bible, their Bible, according to Islamic models, and they were borrowing from Islamic concepts, methodology, and religious customs, which is weird. Now, this links back to the Elchasites, and this links back to all these heterodox groups. And these guys are living slap bang in the middle of the Muslims while they're busy redoing the Quran and the Bible. I just thought it's really odd, this mishmash here. Your thoughts, guys?
That's extremely interesting. I find that fascinating. I'll have a look over this later on. So the Karaites reject the whole rabbinic enterprise, the Mishnah and so on, the Talmud. But the Quran doesn't. The Quran itself draws on these materials quite deeply. You find lots of references. Trying to think of an example off the top of my head. The Shekinah, for example, is a rabbinic phrase that you find in the Quran, and there's no doubt, to my mind, what it means, because it says it's found in the Ark of the Covenant. So that tells you what it means. It means it's the presence of God. So this is a rabbinic word, and it's a rabbinic idea that to separate God from an entity, a presence of God in the world. So that would just be one example, but I'm sure there are many where the Quran draws upon the rabbinic tradition. But actually, what you are saying is that there are a group of literalist Jews who were telling the early Islamic community, or perhaps not even that early, but the Abbasids, to disregard all the rabbinic references in the Quran and simply stick with the hard text of the Bible, and so what we think of as an Islamic rejection of its source material, of its true meaning, actually came from a group of hardline Jews. It's an interesting.
I never thought of that, Paul. That was a brilliant observation. We need to talk more about that. I don't have all the answers. I'm just saying there's all these weird facts that all seem to be connected somehow. But Paul, that was brilliant.
I think you are making us think quite a lot. I think actually, based on what you have just said, it would make sense that everything was about Baghdad, because before that they would have the Quran, they would have the traditions, but some stuff. But it's only after you get to Baghdad where you have a lot of different people, lots of different cultures, when they start really building the model of Islam, when they start creating their practices, and actually as well starting to read what the Quran says. Because, for example, there is no account of anyone saying that this book of the Arabs, they think that the Holy Spirit is Gabriel until way into the Abbasids, for example. So the Quran said Holy Spirit, it meant Holy Spirit. Hundreds of years after the time of Muhammad, that's when you start to hear from people that now is Gabriel. So all of that happens way later and really into the Abbasid period. So it makes sense that once they get to Hira, to Kufa, to Baghdad, to all of that region, is when they really start to create Islam that we would recognize. 100 years prior, it would be something else.
Fair point. I know it's a lot. To me, it's spaghetti. I mean, this just, it's like spaghetti. But do you agree that all of these things somehow end up linking to Islam and they all seem to converge, or there's a confluence?
There's definitely a confluence, I'm sure. But the thing is, when did these Karaites when were they influential?
6th to 10th century, late 6th, early 7th century onwards.
Yeah, but maybe they were influential also during early Islam.
Well, they seem to arise at about the same time that Islam comes on the scene, in theory, or on the same time.
Yeah, but I remember discussions I had with this friend, and he told me this group is very, very odd because it seems to appear out of the blue in history with Islam, and
I suspect the Muslims created them.
Actually, it cannot have been like this. They existed before Islam.
Clearly, they've got links to. I mean, according to these guys, they come from the Elchasai. They're a mixture of the Elchasai, the Mu'tazila, and other groups, right? They seem to be this heterodox group that's heavily influenced by existing heresies, with a strong influence from the Elchasites. But I also get the feeling the Muslims were very busy trying to create, shall we say, groups that were heterodox to Judaism, groups that were heterodox to the Christians, to influence a group that would be, I don't know, it's hard to explain. How would I say it? They would look for a heresy and try to encourage it so that this becomes a bridge towards making Christianity into Chrislam, or Judaism into Judea-Islam, something like that.
Or maybe they had there was a Jewish component in early Islam and all along Islam, actually. Maybe the emergence of Karaites was a way Muslims had to designate some Jews as their friends and allies. A new name, sort of new name for the good Jews.
Correct. So just it might explain. Always says like the Unitarians and the Ottomans. I mean, the Unitarian movement, which is not Christian by any stretch. I mean, it's Christian-like, it looks, but the Ottomans, they were a puppet for the Ottomans, who had their hands so far up their backsides they were moving their mouths, right? And if you look at the Unitarian movement today, they are the biggest spokespeople for Islam is amazing, right? It's crazy. I mean, I've done a talk on the Unitarians. These guys are they're basically Islam with a Christian face. So and they come out of Ottoman-influenced Eastern Europe. And it could be the Karaites are a similar sort of phenomenon or related. But yeah, look, I don't have the answers. I'm not saying I do, but it's just that every time these things constantly cross lines and they join somewhere, and it always has to do with Islam somewhere. And it's in the Quran, it's in the Tafsir. It's just like constant. Yeah, go on.
Part of the irony of this, the Quran had so many intertextual references to the Bible and way beyond the Bible, these apocryphal texts and Syriac teachings and the Talmud and the Ethiopian Bible. The Quran author was very erudite and drew on all these and had, I think, a very complex and sophisticated approach. But as the Islam tried to cut out all of that, and maybe you're right, under a hardline Jewish influence, they said, no, let's reject all of these things that we don't like, and end up with a very minimal, very skeletal version of the Quran. All these references need some kind of explanation, and so that's when you get the Khazars, the storytellers, coming in and just making stuff up off the top of their head. So the attempt to try and get closer to the from what a Jew's point of view might be the original source material, you end up just creating a vacuum that sucks in all sorts of other nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Could be.
A couple of observations. First, actually, about the Mutasilites. This is something that Muslims are never told, that the Islam had a period very early on, their Inquisition, where the belief that the Quran was uncreated was made illegal, and that is with the Mutasilites. So that was the end of the 8th century, beginning of 9th century, and that said, the Caliphate actually said this book is not uncreated, it is created, and if you said that it was uncreated, you were punished. Muslims are never told about that. The problem with that story is that we would have to believe that for 200 years, everybody believed the Quran is uncreated, eternal, all of those things. And then a group appears that ends up taking over the caliphate who says, no, that is nonsense. I think it is more likely that it was never seen mainstream as created at all until we get to that revolution during the Abbasids, and on the back of it is when it becomes divine. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense, that timeline. And about the stories, if we see how the Jews did things, they had a lot of conversations. Their scholars had a lot of conversations. They write them down. They also created stories to teach theology. It looks in Islam almost like they copied that. They started to have conversations about theology. They created the stories, but they just went too far. They made it all into these things did happen. They are all about Muhammad. And if you say otherwise, we unalive you real quick. But it seems like they were having these conversations, perhaps in good faith. They just went too far and made it all divine. No?
No. The thing with these conversations, as you put it, is that you cannot have them in an empire which wants to get stable. You see, who wants to develop on the basis of a common religion. The struggle between the Asharite movement and Mutazilite could not was a real danger for the caliphate, for its stability, for its development, for its legitimacy. And such debates could not take place, and I think it's one of the reasons for the decision of the closure of the doors of the Ijtihad and so on, because it was too dangerous for the political construction of the caliphate. And that's why they went to such great lengths, such as positing that the Quran is not created and so on. it was a way to stop the polemics and the persecution and so on.
Right. Makes sense.
There's a view of Islamic history overall, the whole spread of it, is that it's a sequence of radical firebrands, austere Muslims taking over and then becoming relaxed and casual and modernist, looking at philosophy and becoming tolerant of different groups, and then a counter group takes reacts to this and takes over, boots them out, and reasserts the hardline version. And the first manifestation of this, I guess, would be the Minna, isn't it? Where Ahmed Hanbal rises up and sweeps away the Mutazilites. Eventually, the Caliphate can't stop them. The Caliphates initially support the Mutazilites, and then they can't keep the Hanbalis under control. So they end up just conceding the ground to them and banning the Mutazilites. And then the same pattern goes on all the time through history. And of course, this is the time we're living in now, where after the decline of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, a lot of Muslim nations actually became fairly westernized. And now you've got this resurgence of the hardliners. And it's just
right.
a recurring pattern throughout Islamic history.
Right. I mean, if you look at the you know what's crazy on social media, I've been seeing lately the whole thing about Aisha being 6 and 9, and Muslims going around condemning Jeffrey Epstein, but then of course everyone's turning around saying, yeah, but look at your prophet, his victims were even younger, right? And now, but 100 years ago, they had no problem with it. They had all sorts of reasons why it was a great thing, and now because of modern knowledge, now the narrative is changing. So Islam doesn't stay static either. I'll end here on this slide because I've got some more sort of Jewish, because I've got to mix some Gnostic stuff, some Islamic stuff, and some Jewish Kabbalistic stuff. We've got to go into the Jewish Kabbalah a bit. But I'm kind of putting pieces like I normally do. I put pieces on the table and then I tie them together. But I'll finish with this because this is relevant, because then the next section is another deviation again from, that another path. But I'll just finish here. This is from Andrew Philip Smith, John the Baptist and the Last Gnostics, and it's about the Mandaeans. Now, he says the Marcionites, this was the first heresy from the 2nd century, Marcion, right? He basically only believed in the Old Testament. No, he rejected the Old Testament, and he only believed in a portion of the gospel, and he didn't like certain books, and he made edits to certain of the gospel books. And here's the reason, Marcion was the reason that the church actually created a canon, because he created the first canon, which was a false canon, right? The Marcionites were perceived as Sabians rather than Christians by Ibn Nadim. And it shows that they were rejected by other forms of Christianity and perceived to be sufficiently different. Now, these Sabians, again, Muhammad is a Sabian, right? I keep coming to this, and all these Islamic sources talk about these Sabians as proto-Jewish Christian something, Gnostics. It is also possible that the Syrian and Byzantine Christians had put pressure on Muslim authorities for themselves to be recognized as the only ones worthy of the Christian category or people of the book. And then they become those who wash themselves. Now they go from being baptizers to those who do ablution. Another sect is the Mu'tazila, those who wash themselves, who inhabit the swamps of the Euphrates. Al-Nadim believes they are the breakaway Manichaeans who agreed with the Manichaeans, blah, blah, blah. So now you've got breakaway groups, and then one becomes supreme, the others die out, but the ideas mix. Who knows? Okay, so he knows they are dualistic Mandaeans, right? Although these certainly aren't as clear or as fundamental as they are in Manichaeism. So you've got another group that breaks off from Manichaeism, but they're a little bit waffly, little fuzzy, right? So they're not necessarily clear on things, so that's how these groups evolve. And he described the Mu'tazila as follows. They are numerous in the regions of Al-Batayh. They are called the Sabians of the marshlands. They observe ablution as a rite, and they wash everything which they eat. Their head is known as Al-Hasi, right? And it is he who instituted their sect. They assert that the two existences are male and female, and the herbs are from the likeness of the male, and the parasite plants are from the likeness of the female. So the bad things are female, just kind of like vaguely like Islam believes. Women are the majority dwellers of hell, etc. The trees being veins and roots, okay? They have 7 sayings taken the form of fables, and his disciple was named Simon or Shamun, right? They agreed with Manichaeans about the 2 elemental principles, but later they split. And without naming the sect, the later passage adds 1 group of philosophers and servants of the stars. So he does mention that these are, they're into astronomical sort of deities and worship, assert that they have talismans based on astronomical observations. And this matches the practical magic side of Manichaean culture. Now, if you go into Islamic magic, you're going to come across solar, moon, stars, etc., references, words, and magical spells. So it's just that we keep coming back to the Sabians as a common point. And so you go from Mani to the Mandeans and the Sabians. Now, of course, he says that, oh yeah, these guys are these guys or these guys, but sometimes it's not exactly the case. A breakaway group from these guys might merge with these guys, which are like these guys, but then you get, so there's lots of room for confusion here, but there seems to be some kind of general overlap because they share certain DNA. I'll leave it at that.
I do notice that John the Baptist does have probably a higher profile in the Quran than one might have expected if one was it was simply looked at how many verses in the Quran deal with the life of Jesus. There's a focus on people like Zechariah and Yahya in a way that might surprise some people. I mean, none of the apostles gets a mention, for example.
Right, because John the Baptist is revered by the Manichaeans and they hate Paul.
And the story that leads up to Jesus all begins with Zechariah in the temple, which is rather like the Gospel of Luke, isn't it? It's rather it's a rather surprising approach for the Quran to take.
They want us to wonder why. Why do they start where they start? Why is that reference the relevant one? Was it ignorance? Was it deliberate? You know. I mean, there's more questions than answers, but it's just that Islam has painted itself as a specific thing that starts randomly in the desert of Mecca, you know, in Arabia, just comes out of nowhere, boom, clean, pristine, and pure. But once you start teasing out these little oddities, it is connected to every heresy and every pagan religion you can think of in history, somehow.
No, I was thinking that there is another connection between John the Baptist and Islam. It's the fact that the Sufyanids, so the second wave of Umayyad caliphs, so starting with Abdul Malik and also with his father, and starting with Muawiyah,
Muawiyah, yes.
They established the capital with Damascus.
Really?
Well, and they took the church of John the Baptist as their stronghold. They later transformed it into a mosque, but this church of John the Baptist was known to be the burial place of his skull, and so it shows that there was a devotion within these people to John the Baptist. And here there are dots to be connected. Like I told you, the father of Abdul Malik was from Merv. Was there a Mandean influence or something in the Merv region?
Very likely, very possible.
And why did they choose the Damascus and especially the church of John the Baptist? It was not done randomly, of course. It's not a coincidence.
Interestingly, I mentioned that, in my opinion, John the Baptist and Zechariah have a fairly higher than expected profile in the Quran, and the Umayyads, of course, who were based in the old, what used to be the Byzantine Empire, the Byzantine Palestine. They they had their base at Jabia, which is very close, I think, to Damascus. It's just round the corner. So it would make sense that they would be strongly influenced by the cult of John the Baptist. But strangely enough, when you go out to the east with the Abbasid revolution, John the Baptist seems to fade a bit. I mean, I'm not aware of anyone. Does a much Islamic tradition about John the Baptist? Do they tell stories about him in expanding and flourishing the legend, or is he just kind of left as part of the Umayyad heresy that they're left behind?
We can look into that. I mean, at least what I'm putting forward here is a bit, I know it's off the wall, but does it get you thinking? And do you see that there's odd connections, just odd links, parallels, And I'll end with this briefly. We should call it a night here, but I'll just mention the Book of Angelic Secrets of Raziel the Great. And again, now we get to these heterodox Jews, the whole Kabbalah and whatnot, right? And the Merkava. Rabbi Ishmael said, Metatron, the great Lord. Now they're speaking of the huge angel, Metatron, right? And Metatron, of course, goes straight into Islam as well. I bear this testimony on behalf of the Lord Yahweh, Elohim of Israel, the living and enduring El, our Lord and Master. Now, remember, I've been mentioning how when you go back to the source, you find that generally, at least from the book of Elchasai, they were taking from the Jews, mixing it up with a little bit of other sort of ideas of their own or from other Gnostic sects or whatever. But everything ultimately was just an adaptation of Jewish Kabbalistic thought. And then these ideas seem to make their way into Islam. But here you've got these guys who are making their shahada. I bear this testimony on behalf of the Lord Yahweh, right? And then you have the same phrasing, the same phraseology goes into the Elchasites and then goes into Islam as the shahada. Just an odd overlap. I'll leave it at that. JC, you had a point you wanted to make here? Yeah?
Yeah, this is probably nothing, but at one point I was looking for the origin story of the pillar of Satan, which in Islam they go and they throw stones. It was kind of weird. And I came across this. This is from the Mandean Book of John. And it just has a couple of references here, which are just a little bit weird. It just mentioned Satan, the pillar, and then here, woe to the pillar of Satan.
I mean, that's what they do in Mecca. They throw stones at the pillar of Satan.
And it's probably nothing. It seems very like disjointed, but I couldn't actually find a tradition that would actually mirror what they do. And I found this one. I found interesting. And another thing, let me just share something else. One sec. This one.
Woe to the Jews. Woe to Eleazar of the Great House. Interesting. Woe to the Jews. Very interesting.
Yeah. And this because we said a moment ago that this story begins with Zechariah, and that's true. Except that this one is the most unique Muqatta'at that nobody understands in Surah 19, verse 1. And then when we continue, we see that something breaks in here. So a mention of the mercy of thy Lord to his servant Zechariah. It's almost like something was going on. And that Muqatta'at actually made the whole verse make sense. And yes, they lost it in the copies and the translations. It's possible that if we figured out that Muqatta'at, this verse would make sense and it would point us in the right direction. It's just weird that the most unique Muqatta'at of all of them, they happen to be right here as well when we start to talk about Zechariah. And
so you've got Zechariah, and then you've got these guys with their pillar of Satan, which the Muslims go into Mecca and they stone the pillar of Satan.
Yeah, has anyone heard a story for the origins of that from outside of the narrative, from any other traditions, maybe?
No.
Surely, because I think the tradition of stoning the pillars of Satan, it's just blunt concordism with the Quran. The Quran mentions Satan as being the stoned one, Al-Shaitan, Al-Rajim, or something like this. And the traditionists didn't know what it meant. So they invented this tradition of stoning Satan. I think it's one of the explanations for the pillars. There's something else also that you might like, Lloyd. If you look at the former pillars in Mecca, they had the shape of linguam. You know the
yes.
You know the thing.
There's a very strong overlap with religion in India at the time.
Exactly.
I've looked at it myself. I've never done a show on it, but when I researched it for myself, it's obvious there's connections. Yeah.
They were in a sort of circle. There was a circle with the pillar like this.
The Shivalingams,
it's very, very close to what we find in India or maybe the very eastern part of the Caliphate.
Agreed. I think and look, we know that the Yemenis had strong trade links with India.
Yeah.
So and so did the Aksumite Empire. They were all trading with India. So it's just that I know we're examining aspects of stuff that's in the Islamic literature. It's in the Islamic narrative. A lot of it is no longer discussed. It's no longer emphasized. But when you look at the sources of these, you invariably don't find that Islam came out of a vacuum like they want us to believe. Yeah. It's clearly deeply embedded in the culture and history and the religions of the day, of the heresies of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, just thinking about it, on the account of Ludovico de Berthema in the 16th century, he said it was not a pillar, it was a wall. So if the one that then we had in the 19th century looked like Indian, they had all of these trade routes. It's possible that early on it was a wall, and then they saw that and thought, oh no, we like that version better, and then they changed it. It's possible.
Yeah.
Possible,
definitely. It's pretty much like a wall now, isn't it? So they got three.
And it's moved locations as well. They've moved locations more than once.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's what they do in Mecca. They keep on changing the place and making people believe it has always been like this.
Exactly.
But given the numbers, I can understand.
When we had an Eastern priest with us, he was a friend of Usama. He was with him at the time, and he told us about the Maqam Ibrahim. You know, the stone with the footprints of Muhammad.
Mm-hmm.
And he told us that there was a time where the stone was somewhere else. It was not just by the Kaaba. It was in a hill, or it was not in a haram at the time, and it was moved. And nowadays, people think that the Maqam Ibrahim has always been by the Kaaba, the Kaaba. And it's always like this in Mecca. For example, the shape of the Kaaba. It dates from the 17th century, and we have reports and sources telling us that the Kaaba from earlier times was a bit different. But since the Muslims view the Kaaba as it is today, they imagine that it has always been like this, even though the Kaaba from today dates from, I think, 1996 or something, when the Saudis sort of restored it. And even though they keep on changing the stones of the Kaaba and so on, so it's for me, Mecca is a fantasy that keeps on building its own story.
Yeah, I just thought, why would they include or have references to these clearly non-Islamic things, which are integral to, it just doesn't make sense. And if they did include it much later on, why? One has to wonder, or was it there early on? I mean, but I think we will eventually figure it out. I think we're on the way to it, as to what happened.
The Maqam Ibrahim is mentioned twice in the Quran. So it talks about the standing place of Abraham. It's perfectly feasible that somebody could have just made this thing and put it there and says that's where Abraham stood. At this stage, that's not out of the question.
Yeah. So guys, I think I'll call it a night here. But thank you for the time and I know it's a lot of
Thank you very much, Lloyd. It's been fascinating.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate it. I mean that I've got all these perspectives, and I'm sure you guys would laugh me out of the room if you thought it was nonsense. So, but yeah, I mean, so Odon, you haven't really been involved with the monotheism discussion. That's been me and JC and Usama, but we can go through a load of Islamic references and trace it to paganism that goes back to 1000 BC directly. I mean, so clearly it's got roots that go back 1500 years before Islam, or even longer in some cases. So we can find these references. But it's just that there's more to Islam than meets the eye, or than that the standard approach takes. I know it's not necessarily the academic way right now, but there's more to this picture. Yeah, so guys, we'll pick this up again next week, and thank you. I mean, you guys seem to be really deep in thought here. Like it's really got you going. So to the audience, thank you very much for your time, for your attention, your questions, and thank you all for being here with us. And yeah, let me know what you think about all of this. Does it all seem to make sense? We don't always have the answers, but I think there are things here that bear investigation. That's my view. So yeah, guys, good night. God bless, and we will see you all soon. Take care.